smell hit me the moment I stepped outside to take the trash out. It wasn't the usual aroma of char-grilled burgers or sizzling sausages. This was something different, both sweet and sour, with a metallic tang that clung to the back of my throat. I paused, trash bag in hand, and tried to pinpoint its source. My eyes drifted to the new neighbor's yard, where thick, greasy smoke curled over the fence like a living thing. Slithering into the night air, I watched, a curious unease settling in my stomach, much like the way that my asthma lingered in the air. Like clockwork, the barbecue started every evening just as the streetlights flickered on. It became a nightly ritual I couldn't ignore. The smoke, the smell, it seeped into my home, invading my senses even with windows tightly shut. Eating dinner was almost impossible, as the food took on the bizarre scent of whatever meat they charred next door. Each evening, I'd peer through the blinds, trying to catch a glimpse of the neighbor, but shadows were all that greeted me. Those darkened shapes moved mysteriously, never quite revealing themselves, keeping me on edge, hooked on their secrecy. One night, out of curiosity mingled with frustration, I decided to approach. The air was heavy with humidity, each step laden with indecision as I crossed the short expanse of my yard to theirs. As I got closer, the smell intensified, stronger, more nauseating. My heart thudded in my chest as the smoke enveloped me. Just as I was about to call out, the back door creaked open, and out stepped a figure, silent, silhouetted by the light spilling from inside. Their face was hidden, but there was an undeniable aura of menace that made my courage falter. The neighbor spoke in a voice that reminded me of gravel scraping across metal, inviting me over for dinner. Against my better judgment, I agreed, more out of fear of offending than true willingness. The next evening, I found myself at their kitchen table, a single bare bulb casting harsh light. Their house was surprisingly ordinary, if not a bit too tidy. Except for the table, that is, which was covered in an unsettling array of meats that I couldn't identify. I couldn't shake the feeling that the atmosphere was somehow wrong, like a silent scream waiting to burst forth. As I sat at the table, the neighbor turned their back to me, tending to the stove. From where I sat, the sizzling of meat was loud and invasive, like static rattling in my ears. The longer I observed, the more I became aware of a chill that seeped into my bones despite the stove's heat. I glanced around, noting the absence of personal items, feeling like I was in a stage set for something inevitable but dire. Each dish presented to me brought the nauseating smell closer, and I couldn't help but wonder what, or who, might have been sacrificed for this meal. My nervousness peaked when the neighbor suddenly, inexplicably, asked if I enjoyed exotic meats. Before I could muster a reply, there was a loud, terrible shriek from outside. It resonated through my core, a sound full of suffering not of this world, so visceral it seemed to vibrate the air around us. The neighbor paused, their gaze shifting sharply to the window, an expression flickering across their face, too fast to catch. I felt the room grow colder, everything poised on the brink of some terrible revelation. I sprang from my chair, nearly knocking it over. "What was that?" I demanded, though my voice was barely louder than a whisper. The neighbor's eyes met mine, holding an unsettling calm that only intensified my panic. "Probably the wind," they suggested, though their thin smile suggested they knew far more than they let on. Anxiety twisted my gut as I muttered an excuse about needing air. Fleeing through the back door, the real horror began. Around the side of the house, something lay motionless in the shadows. It was the shock of a lifetime, a sight both surreal and petrifying. There, on the grass, was some kind of crushed cage, bits of bloodied cloth caught in its bent bars. My breath caught, heart pounding as images of what might have been held inside flooded my mind. The barbecue's smell was overpowering out here, impossible to ignore. I stumbled backward, feet tangling over each other, desperate to unsee the visceral proof of some terrible truth. As I regained my footing, the neighbor silently appeared beside me, their shadow long and menacing under the streetlight. "Time for dessert," they murmured, their voice silky yet full of threat. I was back inside before I knew it, the scent of smoke and that all too familiar smell stronger than ever. The neighbor moved with a predatory grace, setting dessert before me, homemade, they claimed, though it looked nothing of the sort. My hands trembled as I picked at it, the sickening sweetness cloying in my mouth. Escape seemed impossible, the walls oppressive, the shadows deeper than before. Despite my growing horror, I was unable to move, rooted by a cocktail of fear and bizarre compulsion. Each tick of the clock was thunder in my ears, marking time in a nightmare. The realization came too slowly, piecing itself together in the cluttered corners of my mind. The screams, the smell, the mysterious meat. Panic rose like bile when I connected the dots. This entire evening was a grotesque charade. It was what this neighbor did, night after night, fed their sinister appetites. The neighbor's eyes glinted with knowing satisfaction as I stumbled to my feet, stomach churning. "You're our new favorite, you know," they said softly. Every word was a sharpened edge, cutting into the last remnants of my sanity as I bolted for the front door, my world collapsing around me. I burst into the night air, the coolness a shock to my overheated skin. My legs carried me away on pure adrenaline, fueled by fear and a desperate need to escape the hell I had unwittingly walked into. Behind me, laughter, a sick, twisted sound that promised this was far from over. The street was eerily quiet, houses dark, windows like empty eyes watching my frantic run. Every shadow loomed large and threatening, every creak of a tree branch like the whisper of death chasing me. I couldn't stop, wouldn't, not until I reached safety away from anyone and everyone. Heart hammering, I reached the home of the only other neighbor I trusted. Maria, a single mother of two, opened her door, eyes widening at the sight of me. I staggered inside, babbling incoherently about screams and barbecues, the odor, the threat. She listened, piecing together my ramblings into a coherent nightmare. "You're shaking," she said softly, guiding me to the couch. Her home was warm, inviting, so starkly different from the cold horror next door. But despite her comfort, anxiety still tugged beneath my skin, warning me that this wasn't over. Maria paced the room, her face growing pale as she digested my account. The two of us formed a plan, driven more by a need for answers than pure courage. "We'll call the police," she said firmly, picking up the phone. The call felt like a tow line thrown into dark waters, as though someone could pull us from this freezing undertow. As Maria's voice echoed over the line, I checked the windows obsessively, fearing those predatory eyes might reappear. But the night remained still, the silence thickening each ticking second with potential malice. Silence settled in the room after the call, heavy with anticipation. Maria glanced at me, her brow furrowed with concern, as if trying to shield her children from the dark truth we'd uncovered. Minutes felt like hours as we waited, jumpy at every stray noise. When a knock sounded at the door, it was thunderous, shattering the taut stillness. Relief flooded me at the sight of blue uniforms. Their presence seemed to unravel the creeping fear, even if just temporarily. We explained everything, each detail, another piece of this suburban nightmare laid bare. Their nods were solemn, but their eyes were already elsewhere, part of a grim understanding that we had barely begun to scratch the surface of something much darker. The officers moved across the street, their silhouettes steady and purposeful against the night. I watched through the kitchen window, the neighbor's yard now eerily silent and devoid of light. Maria stood beside me, a comforting presence as we watched and waited. The officers disappeared into the backyard, swallowed whole by the lingering shadows. Minutes felt like eternity until a distant shout rose up, stark against the quiet night. My breath caught half fear, half vindication. Whatever they found, it was out there, tangled in the smoke and secrecy of what lay beyond those fences. The nightmare was over, or at least beginning to untangle in the dawn's fragile light.